The United States of America is referred to as the home of the free, but how is that true when we have the highest rate of incarceration in the world? Today, millions of Americans have lost their freedoms and are sitting in overcrowded, underfunded prisons. Since the late 1800s, American prisons have been used to isolate and punish people for their crimes. Presidents and government officials have accelerated the negative effects of the prison system through policy change and the privatization of prisons. The American prison system is a failure at every level. Today, there are nearly 2 million Americans locked away in American prisons around the country. People of color in the United States are disproportionately locked up when compared to white Americans, on average 5 times more, meaning 1 in every 81 black men will be incarcerated at one point in their lives. Unfortunately, there is historical significance behind these statistics. After the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 by President Abraham Lincoln, black Americans were finally free from slavery. However, it was not until 1865, where a new amendment was ratified, where slavery would officially end. When the 13th Amendment was officially signed, it had ended slavery and freed around 100,000 enslaved individuals. However, there was a clause in this amendment which changed the American prison system forever. The first section of this amendment states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall be duly convicted, shall exist in the United States. Let's remember that slavery was an economic institution which carried the Southern economy at the time. Once slavery ended, the economy nearly collapsed. With this, Southerners needed to find a new way to make money. They came up with the practice of convict leasing. With the clause in the 13th Amendment, they were once again able to re-enslave African Americans to profit off their labor. With this practice, the number of recently freed African Americans being incarcerated increased exponentially, thus creating the first ever prison system. The practice of convict leasing continued until 1928. However, this did not slow the rise of the prison population.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
The war on drugs had the greatest impact on our prison systems to date. It started the truest prison boom we have ever seen. From the 80s to the 2000s, the number of those incarcerated increased by 300%. This originally was started by President Nixon but was continued until the Obama era. Here is a quote which illustrates the real reason behind the war on drugs.
Know what this was really about. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
Once the war on drugs became an agenda for Nixon, he increased federal spending on law enforcement. He nearly doubled it by the end of the 80s. Nixon may have perpetuated this problem of the growing prison population. However, Reagan was the main contributor.
Drugs are menacing our society.
In 1982, Reagan began his campaign with the saying, "Just say no." He used his wife to increase the number of supporters for the quote-unquote war and to educate children on the dangers of drug abuse. When Reagan was in office, it was a bad economic period of time. Many federal programs lost funding and the poverty rate hit an all-time high. In order to keep his supporters happy, he vowed to put criminals away. Reagan ended up putting $1.7 billion into the prison system with his 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act. This established a series of mandatory minimum prison sentences for drug offenses. A feature of this mandatory minimums was the massive gap between the amount of crack and powdered cocaine, which resulted in the same prison sentence. 5 grams of crack got you 5 years, whereas 500 grams of cocaine got you the same sentence.
Now you can see why drug abuse concerns every one of us.
Reagan is not the only president who passed legislation to make this problem worse. One act that stands out is Bill Clinton's 1994 Violent Crime Control Act. This crime bill was a $30 billion project, which was used to build more prisons and to increase the amount of policing on the street. This bill was not just about government funding, but also about punishment. This bill created mandatory sentences for third strike offenders. The 3-strike rule gave life sentences to those who committed 3 felonies in their lifetime, including drug charges. Bill Clinton has recently spoken at the NAACP annual meeting in 2015, where he explains his regret for signing the bill. Unfortunately, we are still seeing the effects of the bill today. While increased awareness on the war on drugs continues, so do the negative effects that we still see today. Our prisons are still overcrowded with those charged with low-level drug offenses and nonviolent crimes. It was not until the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010, which reduced the discrepancy between crack and powdered cocaine for minimum sentences from 101 to 18 to 1. While the war on drugs is not officially over, it is much less intense than it is today. Today, America has the highest recidivism rate globally. The main reason for this is because we have the hardest barriers of successfully reintegrating people back into our society. So, how do we fix our recidivism rate? We can do this by focusing on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Norway has one of the best prison systems globally. They have one of the lowest recidivism rates in the world. After 5 years of being released, their prisoners are 20% likely to reoffend. Their prisoners are well educated, treated well, and are rehabilitated. Norway focuses on the well-being of their inmates and wants to see them rehabilitated and reintroduced into society. The Norwegian Correctional Services believe that people go to court to get punished and they go to prison to become better neighbors. In America, we need to focus on policy change, decriminalization, and focus on the rehabilitation so we can give Americans a fighting chance to achieve the American dream.